Good evening and welcome to the Future of Education at the iconic Sydney Opera House. Rest assured, I won't be taking the role tonight. I'm Dr Sunil Badami and I'm delighted to join you in this conversation this evening. You know, it seems that wherever you look, the challenges facing education today and how it can prepare children and young people for the incredible, almost unimaginable challenges and changes of tomorrow are being discussed and debated everywhere you look. It's clear that for many parents and students and educators and policymakers like you, that there are many concerns about the state of education today and how it can address and meet those challenges, not just now in the age of disruption, where we're experiencing greater and more profound change than ever before, but whatever the future brings. How can we find solutions to these concerns today and help prepare students and learners to turn the possible challenges of tomorrow into opportunities? This evening, we're joined by author, commentator, broadcaster, and education campaigner, Caro, author and course director of the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation at the University of Technology, Sydney, Associate Professor Hunte, and director of the Future Schools Alliance and former principal of Melbourne's Templestowe College, Hutton. And among other things, we'll be asking, how can we make education relevant to students today and keep up with the demands of an ever more rapidly changing world? What role can technology play in the future of education? How can business and education engage with each other more meaningfully? And what should we be learning? How should we be learning? And why should we be learning? Now, before I introduce Jane, Peter and Bem, a few short housekeeping announcements. We acknowledge the Eora people of the Gadigal Nation on whose ancestral land the Opera House sits. We acknowledge custodians and elders past, present and future, and pay respect to the cultural authority and traditions which they have gifted this land. We recognise the rich contribution Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures make to the diversity of the Australian community. Now, please turn your mobiles to silent and don't record the session. But if you are taking photos, please turn off your flash and feel free to share your thoughts, comments, ideas and questions on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram with the hashtag #FutureOfEdu. Because if we put the cation in, you'd have run out of characters, wouldn't you? Now, please be aware that we will be live streaming this event for your colleagues, and you can register or pass on the link at canon.com.au/businessinsights/future of education. And we will have time for questions from you and your colleagues around the country at the end of the discussion. But before we do start the discussion, I'd like to thank all of our wonderful panellists here tonight, not only on stage, but here with us, who so generously gave us their time, expertise and wisdom in helping me to prepare the white paper. Thank you. Now, it gives me very great pleasure to introduce our panellists this evening. Best known for his incredibly popular TEDx talk about giving control back to students, and as the teacher who transformed Melbourne's Templestowe College from a school of last resort to one recognised internationally as one of the most innovative in the world, Peter Hutton brings 25 years of experience and a progressive approach to our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Hutton. An internationally acclaimed author and expert in the field of creative intelligence, Associate Professor Hunte's interests lie in the thinking, theory and practice of creativity and in trailblazing educational innovation. As the course director for the world first Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation at UTS, Bem is responsible for the interdisciplinary integrity and inspiration behind this flagship combined degree. Ladies and gentlemen, Associate Professor Hunte. Jane Caro is one of Australia's most recognised commentators and a tireless advocate for a better education system. A lecturer, advertising copywriter and co-author of What Makes a Good School, she brings broad expertise, a fresh perspective and her trademark passion to any conversation, especially about the future of education. And tonight, She's joining us before heading to the Mumbrella Awards, where she's been nominated for the prestigious Columnist of the Year award. Jane Caro. Welcome, everyone. Well, look, I mean, it seems like today we've had an announcement about $4.4 billion being given by the government to the Catholic and independent education sectors. We've had a report suggesting that the bottom 50% of school leavers are gaining entry into teaching degrees. It seems like everywhere we look, like a headline in The Australian last week about, questioning the idea of the so-called 4 Cs of creativity, critical thinking, collaboration and communication and soft skills for the 21st century. There seems to be so much discussion, so much debate about education at the moment. Why do you think that is, Jane?
It's always been like that, really, Sunil. I don't think it's any worse now than it ever was. The $4.4 billion is a whole other ballgame. But I think the headlines about the, people who get under 50% ATAR, that's an ignorant headline. There are a lot of people who find their way to teaching via other pathways. And there are an awful lot of people who may not do particularly well at the end of their school year who are actually fabulous people, worthwhile people who find another way and in fact are probably incredibly valuable teachers because they don't just do it because they don't know what else to do when they leave school, they do it because they have a passion for it. So, there's an awful lot of clickbait going on with schools and people know they can drive panic like that by doing something sensational about schooling and teachers and things like that. But frankly, I've never bought the belief that we have failing schools or education's in crisis or any of those headlines. I think that's very self-serving and as far as I can see, and I travel around Australia a lot talking to exclusively really public education, public school communities, most public schools are doing a fine job. Most teachers are good at what they do. Most students are learning what they need. Our great problem is those students who come from way behind. From the minute they are born, they are needing extra help. And Australia does the precise opposite of what it should do. It gives far too much to kids who already have plenty and far too little to kids who start out with very little. And if you were going to ask me what the problem is, I'd put my finger right on that.
So what do you think makes a good teacher, Peter?
I think there's far too much discussion about what makes a good teacher and not
Bravo.
enough about students, frankly. I must come and visit some of the schools that you're going to, Jane, because whilst I agree with you that the staff in those schools are trying as hard as they can to implement a broken system, we can't move away from the fact that we've got a model of education that is a factory, industrial-based model. And until we break that down, teachers are going to be continually frustrated, and that's why more than half leave the profession within the first 5 years, because they go into the profession wanting to do the right thing and they end up finding themselves as jailers and youth detention workers, implementing a failed system. And it's about time that we approached students for the individuals they are, Sunil, and that's not to take away the role of the teachers. Sometimes people misinterpret my focus on students as saying that there's no role for a teacher. A teacher is a catalyst. They speed up the reaction, but the reaction shouldn't be part of them. We're there to serve the needs of the students.
I mean, it sounds like a great idea, individualised learning plans as outlined in Gonski, individualised assessment, tailored to individual needs. But most teachers I know work incredibly long hours, preparing lesson plans and mentoring to students. How feasible is that in reality, do you think?
Well, essentially they're spending a huge amount of time and nobody disputes that. I've never gone into a school and seen people lazing back, reading the electronic newspaper nowadays. But, the reality is teachers are working hard, but they're trying their darndest to get kids to engage with stuff that's basically boring and irrelevant. And so if they were actually able to empower students to follow their own interests and passions, they would give what they could within the hours and within the depths of the passion that they're willing to contribute. they could then do that, but they're not the focus of it. They shouldn't be driving the learning. If you actually empower students to drive their own learning, and the way to do it is, you can't, if anyone thinks that teachers are going to be writing individualised learning plans for all their students, that model doesn't work. We just don't have the means, the financial means and the time to be able to do that. But you can support students with the support, hopefully, of their parents, and where their parents aren't able to do that, with some other volunteers or socially responsible adults. But students are actually capable, certainly at the secondary setting, and in conversations that I've had with primary, even at that higher primary level, they are able to write their individualised learning plans based on their strengths and interests and pursue that. And it's a very sustainable workload, and it's not at the moment.
But it seems that so much education is so siloed between, sectors and segments, even departments within institutions. So tell me, Bem, how can we encourage more transdisciplinary learning, and why should we?
Why should we? Because students today are going to be crossing into all these industries that they wouldn't have crossed into before. So we actually get students to do a speculative exercise around planning their 17 future jobs with, 2 or 3 moments when they'll be intentionally unemployed. With a good rationale for why they should jump from one job to another, and also with descriptions of their jobs, jobs that don't exist yet, because that is one of the things that they're going to be tackling. So to have enough foresight to understand that you're going to need these skills when you jump between fields. So that's a big why. How do you do it? Well, you need institutional support, and you need it to come from the very top, because we have organised our whole educational system around teaching into silos. From the beginning of high school onwards, you go to a maths class, you go to a English class, and never will poetry and sums meet. So really, how do you create this passion-based learning that's contagious, that you were talking about, Peter, that's all about designing around what you're interested in learning? That's a very good way to drive transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary learning.
But we often talk about, on one hand, the need for people to be experts in, particular areas. At the same time, we also encourage our kids to have a broad education. Is there a disjuncture between the two, do you think, Jane?
No, I've become extremely sceptical about most experts. I kind of think that an expert is someone who sounds like they know what they're talking about. I've always been a great fan of the old-fashioned way of learning, where everyone, for example, did a humanities degree, and then you specialise in what you want to do as a job once you have that broad understanding of the world in which you live. Because it strikes me that we've mistaken education for actual workplace training. So we've mistaken education for something which is to turn out little worker bees. And actually, it's never been about that. The reason we have, for example, universal free secular public education, at least for the next week or two, until ScoMo gets finished with it, is because, in fact, it was Lord Palmerston who said, when the first Universal Suffrage Act was passed, universal, well, it was men, but that's all they ever thought about then, but he said, if we're going to have democracy, we must educate our masters. And what he meant was, if you're going to have a functioning democracy, you have to have a well-educated citizenry. I mean, that's what education's for. I'm not terribly worried, and I don't mean to be disrespectful at all. I admire tremendously what Bem and Peter and Sunil are talking about, what Canon's trying to do, but I'm not terribly worried, it's not my area anyway, about what the jobs of the future are going to be like and all that kind of stuff, and the 17 jobs and how people are going to keep up with it. What I want is a well-educated general population who can then very quickly skill up for whatever it is they need to do because they've learned how to learn. And the thing is that Any tin pot dictatorship can create a highly educated elite. They all do. It's the easiest thing in the world to create a highly educated elite. What's difficult, what's hard, what's the absolute mark of a civilised community is a well-educated general population. And what we need is kids who have a breadth and a depth of understanding and who can follow their own interests. Of course, big picture schools, I think, do that now, and that's very impressive. But what we need to be doing is turning kids on to the idea of their natural curiosity to find things out. And then whatever job it is they go off to into the future, they'll pick it up like that because they'll know how to learn.
Bem, you talked in the white paper about the transition from knowing to being. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? And how can we implement that transition, not just in your degree, but throughout the educational journey for many people?
Well, I think, so this whole idea of the 4 or 5 Cs, whatever and the discussion around 21st century learning skills are all qualities of being that you were talking about, Jane, that you want someone who can be a learner, someone who can be in the world, be a good citizen. That's kind of what we're working towards, a curriculum for being versus a curriculum towards just knowing. And this is a shift that's happening that is a very powerful shift. Certainly we're trialling it in our space. Knowing is all about provisional knowledge. We have senior professors in our university who are in 101 classes relearning fields that they've made a major contribution to. So in that sense, filling your head full of knowledge, it has to be done again and again, and you have to be able to continually learn. So certainly our universities are looking at lifelong learning and how you can continue doing that from 0 to 99 and beyond for many of us in the future. So that's really where the whole idea of being comes from. And it's about this shift from just filling your mind up with facts and actually focusing on the learner. So there are many things to be learned, but what is it about the learner that we need to transform?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Well, that's what a curriculum for being would be tasked to discover and to elicit in students.
I mean, the idea of creating curious, compassionate, creative, collaborative people is wonderful. But I guess, when we think about how we instill those qualities, a big issue for many people would be, how do we know that they have taken? How can we assess these kind of qualities? Is it possible, Peter?
Well, firstly, I take objection with the word of creating them, because that again goes back to that metaphor of production, okay? Young people come hard, like they're just mini adults, okay? This concept of childhood, they come pre-wired wanting to learn, wanting to give, wanting to create, and unfortunately, the system effectively crushes that out of a lot of them. And so it's not about doing this thing to them. It's about getting out of their way and fostering their natural desire to learn. Now, I'm not suggesting you just leave them to their own devices, but that's the role of a great teacher, to inspire, to motivate, to coach, to connect with resources within the community. And it leads on to that question of technology. In the old days, teachers were the font of all knowledge because, you didn't have the internet where, kids could be fact-checking you whilst you're teaching. You actually, and that's why we have siloed education, because there was too much stuff for everybody to know, and so you had to, single down a small element, and that became a silo. But now, kids do fact-check you whilst you're, in flight, so to speak.
I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the teacher once was considered to be the font of all knowledge, the source of authority. But we see now, with rising burnout, falling retention rates, that teaching is harder and less respected than ever. How do you think we can improve the standard of teaching, and what role do you see teachers playing in the future, Jane?
I'm again wary of improving the standard of teaching. I really hate that phrase, quality teachers. I hate it with the same passion that I hate the phrase strong women. And the reason is the same, and that is when we say quality teachers, that implies that the ones we've got now are not quality. When we say strong women, it's sort of like, oh my goodness, you're a strong woman, unlike all those others who are weak. So I really hate those phrases because they reveal our lack of respect. So I think the thing about teachers is that, in fact, as Peter said, they come out of university and they are, and I've seen this in my own daughter and I've seen it in my niece, they come out of university and they are raring to go. They have all the top information. They've actually been trained pretty well, but they get into a system where it's very difficult for them to do what they want to do. My daughter said to me once, and I'll never forget it, it was sort of crushing, because she said, I could do 3 really creative things in the classroom in a week, really creative, out of the box, that I know the kids would love, but I can't report and account for 3 out of the box creative things. So what I end up doing is 1, because I just haven't got the time. I can't stay awake until 1 in the morning, accounting and filling in forms and, putting my portfolio together for the Teachers Institute and continue to do all that has to be done. So our very system of this terrible situation we have in society today where nobody trusts anybody, so that you won't let someone just go and be a teacher in their classroom and do what it is that they are just desperate to do, which is to turn on their students. No. You have to ride on their back and check every minute of every day of what they're doing, because if you're not there checking what they're doing, they might get away with something, Sunil. They might not do it right. Centrelink, some poor bastard on Newstart might get 5 cents more than they're entitled to. I mean, we are in this system where it's, hammer. And what it's doing is it's killing creativity dead. In the classroom, in politics, in every situation. I mean, I would argue we are not siloed in our society, that in fact, unfortunately, the infection of accountability, which I've never liked, because it's a blame-oriented measure. Accountability means holding someone to account. Therefore, it kills creativity, because creativity, by its very nature, is risky. It hasn't been tried before, and it probably will fail. So if you're going to be held to account for it, you won't be creative. You won't. It just kills it. Responsibility, that's what we should be doing. And it's across the whole of society, and education is no more protected from it than anything else.
Peter, how did you manage to turn Templestowe from a very traditional kind of school, very siloed, very factory output kind of model that you mentioned, and turn it into something more innovative and creative, student-centred, while still being able to, I guess, nod to those accountability measures, I presume, that were imposed upon you?
Well, Sunil, the factory was about to close. Okay, so basically we had 286 students and 23 Year 7s. Basically, we needed a point of difference, and essentially the department took their eye off what we were doing. Nobody wanted to go near the hand grenade in case it went off and they could be killed by collateral damage. So basically we tried an innovation, and I ducked my head waiting to be slapped, and as was my own schooling experience, and the slap didn't come, so I became more and more brave, tried more and more innovations, and by the time somebody noticed, the thing was out of the bag and running.
Now, Templestowe's been an incredible success, but why hasn't the department adopted more of those reforms across the board to other schools?
I think this is the trouble, and it does go back to what Jane was saying about trust at the local level. I disagree with one thing, and it's a moot point, but teachers shouldn't be siloed. That really is not a great professional model. We need to be working together in teams and working collaboratively, but they need to be small teams. But the problem with all departments, and why we're not getting any traction for change, anywhere basically in the world, is that the departments are too big, and increasingly they're not even being run by educators. They're being run by bureaucrats who don't necessarily have a background in education, and so God forbid that they're afraid that they might propose something that educators might just go, "Are you serious?" And so consequently, they don't want to make any significant change. It's steady as she goes. We know the ship's going over the heading out to sea rudderless, but, as long as we don't make any sudden deviation, we can't be held accountable. What we actually need is trust for the school leadership, and I'm not just talking a principal, but the leadership team in a school should be held accountable, but you can't hold somebody accountable and then tie their hands behind their back and say you've got to implement this outdated system. If it's working fine in a school, hats off to them, bless them, let them continue. But the leadership in every school should be empowered with meeting the needs of the students that are in their community, and they should be accountable to the parents and the carers in that community. And if they're not doing a good job, they should be removed and redeployed somewhere else, but they should be given full accountability and trusted to deliver the needs for the students in there, for whom they're responsible.
Ben, what about at university? I mean, we do talk about innovation, but it seems to be one of those nebulous words that people use, whenever they want to kind of change the subject. I mean, is it just a buzzword? What can it mean practically, especially in a degree of creative intelligence and innovation? And how can we foster it educationally?
Okay, so I think that you're right that it's every single institution is doing it, not just universities. Everybody is under pressure to innovate, and I think it's being done with a big I and a little I in various degrees. What do we do to cultivate it? I think it goes back to what you've been talking about. Both of you talked about trust. I was listening quite hard, and the trust in the people doing the work, and the willingness and the freedom to break rules and break with structures and break with traditions should you wish to try something new. So we've tried something radically new in combining 25 different degrees. That's a radical departure from a model that most universities would go with. And the fear around it, it was attempted twice before, it was successful, and the fear around trying to do something is huge. So you have to, like Peter said, you just sort of duck and you you don't ask for permission, you ask for forgiveness. And you
don't even bother to do that, really.
Yes, yeah, but don't ask for anything, just do it, GSD, yeah. So just get stuff done. And the results are there, like you say, and then it's interesting because you take the risks, and I think innovation is all about risks, but nobody wants to protect you while you're taking those risks. They're very happy to take the credit for the risks that you've taken and showcase the wonderful innovation that has resulted without actually looking at the personal risk that you do. And we have a Students as Partners program, so it's not just us taking the risks, it's people, our students who believe in what they're doing in pioneering something new together, a new way of learning, new way of being, that are taking the risk too. And it's wonderful when it does have that lovely sense of contagion and feedback, but it's always a retrospective thing, hindsight makes sages of us all. But we can learn from some of these experiments that we've taken, and we can bottle some of what we're doing and share it, because there aren't that many people doing capital I innovation in education.
Can I just add something? I think the problem is innovation has become one of those words that's been mantraized. In other words, it's become drained of meaning. And I often think we forget what innovation actually is, because I think one of the most extraordinary and really heartening innovations in Australia over the last decade, maybe a bit longer, is the fact that everything I go to, there is a welcomed country or an acknowledgement of country. Now, we think of innovation always as grandiose technology and big things, but actually innovation is just suddenly recognising that it's important to pay respect to the original owners of the land and to changing the way that we approach our courtesy and making it very much of this place. And that's an innovation. And I think that's the other thing. We've gotten caught up in bright, shiny objects, which obviously matter and are important and are innovative. But there are lots of things that are small and human that are innovations.
I mean, when we look at technology beyond it being, and we talk about technology primarily in regards to innovation, beyond being fact-checked by students, what role can technology play in education, do you think, Peter?
I was hoping to get onto the Indigenous question, because whilst I love doing welcomes to country, and that is really important, but the educational outcomes for Indigenous students are horrendous, and it's because the traditional system of education I don't think benefits many students. Some play the game and get good outcomes, but for a lot of Indigenous students, that traditional education system just does not work, and I think that's. I just want to acknowledge that. I just don't think that's fair. If you look at the outcomes of Indigenous students, they are improved. Gradually there is some improvement being made, but nowhere near the sort of improvements that we do need. Sorry.
It is really interesting you say that, because I think that there is a kind of implicit inference that somehow, if there is a failure in Indigenous educational outcomes, it is incumbent on the students rather than on the system.
Well, they need to be given an option. There's a big push amongst education that is, to be honest, forced upon Indigenous people, of direct instruction. Okay, where if you just do more of it and you have more consequences and you do it more explicitly, that you're going to get better outcomes. Now, the outcome might be measurably, slightly better, but it's equally as soul-destroying. It's just not fit for purpose.
Well, this is the Noel Pearson direct instruction in Cape York, isn't it? Which was found to actually have falling outcomes for the community, and it ended up being shut down. I think Chris Sara, the great Aboriginal educator, said that it was a complete failure.
But see, again, why do we, something else imposed on people, right? Who, to be honest, who have had lots imposed on them over the years. We need to work with community and find out, and whether that's Indigenous community or just your local community, we need to find out what's important to the young person and to the families that they come from, and then we should build curriculum from that. One of the things that annoys me is that, I hate curriculum. Right? Curriculum, if you go back to the root word, curriculum means journey, and that's what it should be. But curriculum now means, facts, bag of facts, okay? And, essentially the core, in America, the Common Core, or the core curriculum, it's 95% of the apple. Can you imagine buying an apple with only 5% fruit on it, the bit that you actually want to eat? But kids every day are subjected to basically stuff that is irrelevant. And believe me, when I went to school, I was told the same thing that everybody in this room was: sometime this is going to be useful. One day, gee, you're going to, it must be coming, because not much of it has been so far. What about just-in-time learning? What about, inspiring students, exposing them? Because, again, that's a role for the teacher, to expose kids to new concepts and new ways of thinking, and to provoke and challenge, and then allowing that natural, desire for exploration. Now, that's what should be happening with community and the Indigenous, of things that are relevant to them.
Why do you think so many schools, I guess you'd say in disadvantaged areas on the outskirts of, city centres or high SES centres, such as, for example, Plumpton High or Marylands or Greystanes High, seem to be such hotbeds of innovation, do you think?
Necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, innovation always happens in disadvantaged situations. You were right down as low as you could go. Human beings don't change until it gets too uncomfortable to stay the same. That's just basic survival. So if you're teaching in a nice, cushy, middle-class school, you're probably doing pretty ordinary stuff, boring stuff, because you don't have to innovate. So why would you? It's normal, sane and reasonable not to, frankly. But if you're really up against it and you've got to try and find a way to turn these kids on, and you're desperate to do it, you are going to turn yourself inside out to come up with new ways. I can't remember who the researcher is who points this out, that really major breakthroughs almost always come out of difficult situations, never out of easy ones.
Now, Peter, before you were talking a lot about, teachers and educators being at a community level accountable to parents, but, here in Sydney, two of the main topics of conversation at every dinner party are not only where did you buy and how much did you pay, but where are you sending the kids?
How much have your property prices fallen?
where are you sending the kids to school? And it seems a lot of the discussion around education at the moment is framed upon parental anxiety, and especially about kids getting a job. So it's great to talk about the idea, I guess, of, an educated populace, more, critical and involved in democracy, but with reports by Ernst & Young suggesting that 40% of degrees will be obsolete within 10 years, numerous reports suggesting that anywhere between, 43 and 47% of jobs may be obsolete, or current jobs may be obsolete. How can we address those concerns, and how can, I guess, workplaces and businesses engage more meaningfully with education? Peter, I'd like to hear from you, and then I'd like to hear from you, Ben.
Well, I think the worst thing is we're just wasting kids' time. We're squandering their natural talents and their passion for learning. And I was talking to a focus group of students recently about, because I've been asked to prepare a talk on working with 20-somethings. How, because this seems to be a problem for employers working with 20-somethings. And I, who would have thought? And I asked the young people, what do you want the employers to know? And they said, well, we'd like you to know that just because we've done a course or we're qualified in something, don't expect that we know anything about it. And they were deadly serious, and there was nods around the group, and I've gone, please explain. And they said, just because we've done a course, what we've actually been exposed to is we've been given quantities of information, been forced to masticate it, and then regurgitate it on an exam, and we've actually been taught techniques to then unlearn as quickly as possible so that we can then learn the next thing that's required of us. Now, with neuroplasticity, what the hell is that doing to young people's brains? But essentially, and this is a very educated person now studying for their PhD, who basically said, don't expect us to know anything we've learnt.
So how do you, I guess, tackle that in your degree, Ben?
So it's really important for our students particularly to be intersecting with industry partners. We have a lot of industry partners. And if you go back to that whole notion that education is an intergenerational social contract, it involves all of our industries, and it should involve them, and they should be involved. And I take my hat off to Canon for being involved in this project. And more organisations should be, and thankfully more are coming on board. And certainly, so I've been writing a paper and exploring this notion of a third space. Now, a third space is based on liminality, that which is betwixt and between. What is between university and between workplace? What is that liminal space where real learning can happen, the porosity at the edges of our institutions where discoveries happen, porosity between our disciplines where discovery happens? What is that interesting space for emergence where industries can learn from what we're doing and our students can learn in real time from what's happening, the real problems of the world? So, yeah, it's very important for us.
Now, going back to the role of technology, I mean, there's been a lot of debate about smartphones, there's been a lot of debate about, kids being dumbed down by going on the internet or being distracted by screen time. What role do you think technology can play in the future of education, Jane?
Technology is enormously important to the future of everything, but it always has been. I always think to myself, when Jane Austen was a girl, if mothers caught their daughters reading novels, they had fainting fits because novels were seen as corrupting young women's morals and being absolutely terrible. Now, if you found your daughter reading a novel, you'd sob with delight and relief. So, I think we moral panic about whatever the new technology is. So when I was young, television was going to rot our brains, and so on and so forth. So I think, the first rule of parenting has always been to me, don't panic. That is the first rule of parenting. And we have a panicked generation of parents. And it is partly in a way, we drive this by going, it's all, if there's going to be these jobs, you don't even know what they are, and the future's going to be constantly changing, and the pace of change is going to keep accelerating. Well, it's not surprising that people go, I'd like to find a desert island or a duvet to crawl under. I don't want to do that shit. Of course you don't. That's normal. Innovation is useful as long as it's useful. We shouldn't change things just because we can. We should change things because there's a benefit to us if we do. If technology is helping kids in the classroom, great, let's use it. With a proviso, if not every child can get access to that technology, no bloody way. Every child has to get access to that technology. If it's useful, use it. If a teacher can see a use for it, good, go for it, use it. If it's not, I don't care if you write in sand with a quill. If you get a benefit out of it and kids learn to learn. I mean, it's just, I think we get, like I said before, bright, shiny objects, they're great if they enhance. They are a problem if they overwhelm.
What about you, Peter? How do you see the role of technology in education?
I don't really like the technology question, so I was hoping that would be Bem or somebody. Like, technology is an enabler, you know, had it not been, it's a tool, you know, had it not been for the internet, we wouldn't be having conversations about individualised learning. It makes that possible, but it shouldn't, you know, and this is what Jane's saying, it shouldn't be driving the agenda, but, you know, I think the thing that kills me most is the technology there is there now to enable individualised learning, right? Call it personalised, call it individualised, doesn't matter. But the technology is there to support individualised learning. We've also, you know, it's interesting that we always talk about in the classroom, whereas a lot of the stuff that kids are now really engaged with, and whether it's Fortnite or any other program, is stuff that's outside the classroom, okay? You know, so, you know, I think technology has this great thing that it transcends that boundary of school so that kids can learn, you know, literally anywhere, anytime. It's just that the current system isn't set up to validate the learning that's happening outside of that.
So finally, what do you see the future of education as potentially being? Bem?
Well, I think it has to go back to this whole idea of learning for being, not just knowing, but not without having depth of knowledge too. So if you're talking about a T-shaped individual, someone who has a breadth and someone who has a depth of knowledge, for example, in my degree, teaching creative thinking skills, you're never creative in abstract, you're creative in a practice at something, be it in business, be it in design, be it in science, be it in writing. So you'd still have that depth, but you'd have this incredible breadth as well. The future of education, yes, it will be more personalised. And I think going back to the technology question, we don't know what technology is going to do to education yet. We have no idea. I feel like it's already changing the way we think and act and in the world and the way we structure our organisations. It's created so much change already. We still don't know. I see it as perhaps, you know, inventing electricity before we've invented the vacuum cleaner or the washing machine. We have yet to see the benefits of it, and it's going to be up to our most innovative to understand the best ways that are going to transform education in all the right ways. And I think going back to your point, Jane, around we don't, just because we could doesn't mean we should transform. So I think that, yeah, learning will be much more individualized. We already have a philosophy that no student graduates the same from our degree. They come from 25 different core disciplines, and they bring their own personal experiences, which is going to become more and more valuable as well. And it's going to be a lifelong enterprise, I think, in the future.
What about you, Peter? I always feel a bit worried when I ask him a question because I think he wants to answer another one.
I shouldn't have actually been paid by Canon for this gig. Like, you know, it was actually just like several hours of venting. Okay, firstly, ATAR has to go. That's a non-negotiable. It should be taken down. It can actually be done incredibly quickly, even if you just removed... No, seriously. Even if you just removed the aggregation of scores into the one number and kept subject scores, we could do that within 2 years very easily. And universities, essentially ATAR only exists for the big 8 universities anyway. So if they're so keen on it, let them run their own exams at their own expense. Okay, so that's the first thing. The old story that, go to school, get good marks, get a good ATAR score, go to uni, buy a house and get a mortgage, etc. That narrative is now dead in the water. And, the concept that all students should go to uni is, as in directly having left school, is a complete farce, and it's an old paradigm and we need to remove it. It's not to say that there's not a role for unis, but, and Bem, you would, I'm sure, agree with this, they have to analyse their role in this thing, because you're getting graduates coming out and going to whatever employment thing and expecting that they're worth $70,000 and they're not. That's the reality. Far rather give me somebody and pay them $30,000 and learning on the job. So we've got to move down that direction, and literally this model, I was very cynical that there was any change in the model up until about the last 12 months, but I see the system groaning and creaking and gradually changing direction. There are some incredible educators, there are some great teams within schools, and I would also say that the students themselves are now starting to mobilise, get educated and have their, exercise some pressure to change the institutions from within. And I think the fact that parents are as nervous and scared because they're looking at school and then looking at their own workplaces being restructured very quickly and going, this is not fit for purpose any longer. And that's their fear. We just need to be able to offer them a valid alternative.
Jane, what do you think the future of education will or be?
I've no idea. The only thing I've ever found about the future, I remember when I was at school in 1972 or 73, and our teachers said to us, oh, your generation, the only thing you're going to have to worry about with all the new inventions and things is what you're going to do with your leisure time. So in the 24/7 week was born. But so my view about the future is whatever anyone tells you it's going to be like, expect the opposite. But my view is this, that schools will go on doing what they've always done best, and that is creating islands of sanity. Because we have an increasingly crazy world. And if schools can be a place where every child knows that what goes on in that school happens for a reason. Now, they may end up being punished because they've done the wrong thing, but they know why. They know how that happened. Well, that will save the world. If we could do that, everything else will flow from that. Because if you have kids who are in chaotic, insane situations and they're going to chaotic, insane, stressed out, high anxiety, chasing completely arbitrary measures, and teachers in fear and loathing of their job because they're not living up to some spurious standard that some shock jock on some radio stations decided what you should do, then we are going to get an increasingly crazy world. And I think it's pretty goddamn out of control right now. So that's what I hope. And I don't care if people use technology to get there, or if they break out of silos, or they become innovative, or whatever the hell it is they do, curiosity, creativity. I also would like to see, and one C I really don't like, and that's the compliance word. And the reason I don't like it, this will shock you, is because it doesn't suit me, but also because for me, creativity lies in subversion. Creativity is the question in the back of a kid's mind when they're told by the teacher in the classroom, you have to do it this way. Why do I have to do it that way? And so as long as we have this conflict in our education system right across the board between obeying the rules and compliance and passing exams and doing your little thing of what the trajectory of life is, we won't train kids to be curious and creative because we've knocked the subversiveness out of them. If we want, we're going to have to throw the doors open and let kids question us and challenge us. When I was at school in the 70s, we did that. But we've gone away from it. We've gone down this much more rigid path over the last 20 or 30 years. I think we got very scared of how clever we were. And we got frightened about it. And so we started to go into this eins, zwei, drei, look at the world. I hope we stop it soon.
Schools are not sane places.
No, they're not, but they should be.
Because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome.
I agree with you. They're not sane, but they create islands of sanity, which may be that teacher in that classroom over there who is a
That's
sane
boredom,
person.
that's not sanity. Seriously, we're teaching old, outdated
Yeah, we're talking about
things.
different things.
Yeah.
We're talking about different things. I'm not talking about what
It's
they're
security
teaching.
for students.
It's not what, and I'm not
I
talking
wonder
about what they're
if you
teaching.
can guess who the disruptive kids in their class were. Now, we can keep this conversation going, but we do have a few questions from everyone, and I'd love to hear questions. Now, of course, it is a forum on teaching and learning, so I'll ask you to raise your hand, and someone will come over with a microphone. Please don't make it a rumination or a meander or a statement. I will be listening for the inflection at the end, okay?
My name is...
Here, I'm going to come down. Here you go.
Thank you.
Oh.
My name is Carolyn Bland, and I'm principal of a school for highly disadvantaged young people in Blacktown and Fairfield. And I'd like to commend many of the comments that have been made today. And we are in a state of constant innovation because the people we deal with are from very complex family backgrounds. And I'm running a conference for the Alternative Schools Network, who've never ever had a chance to get together and to share the learnings that we each have. We're all very small schools. And I was surprised today to get a call from the New South Wales Educational Standards Authority to say they'd heard about our conference, which we had thought was covert. And they wanted to come along and speak to us to find out our views on how the curriculum should be changed. And I was impressed because I think one common theme we've got here has been the current curriculum is very constraining, and I totally agree with that. It doesn't work for the real people in the real world that will be at the future. And it doesn't work for disadvantaged young people who don't have parents to teach them those special skills that really come into the 4 Cs or 6 Cs or however many
Where's that
Cs you
inflection,
have.
Carolyn?
So what I'm saying is, I think it would be really good if all of the people here could put in comments on this change in curriculum. It is an open forum. The Board of Studies, known as NESA, N-E-S-A, wants people in the community to contribute their ideas and their thoughts on how this constraining curriculum we're focusing on right now can be improved. So I'm really adding a little ray of sunshine to say, please do something. Let's not all just sit here and complain. Let's write something to these people and do something. Will you do that?
There's the inflection. I'll read something from one of our colleagues around the country, because this is being live streamed at Canon Future of Education all around the country. This is from Dominic Duterte, who's an educator in Queensland. She said, you know, it's one from Lee Hancock, a former high school teacher who now works as a senior program manager for one of Australia's largest digital mental health organisations. And it was a concern of one of our contributors, Miles Campbell, talking about the idea of well-being, student well-being. How can we raise student well-being in an educational context? Or are we just paying lip service to it, do you think? Bim?
I think going back to the whole idea of raising student well-being, I think you start with stopping the ranking system. Because the minute you rank people, you put them in a state of spiritual deference. They're not as good as the person next to them. They arrive in university thinking they're so important, these ranks that they have on their foreheads. But they're really meaningless in the long run. I've had 2 children go through an HSC and seen the struggles and the frustrations of the rote learning that they had to do to achieve the goals that they had to achieve. And I've got a 3rd child, and I think the stakes are high. It's like Saving Private Ryan. I don't want the 3rd one to have to do an HSC. He's 11. He's got 6 years.
I'm going to say something really that's heresy.
No, really?
Oh, no, this is real heresy. in education circles, if you want to increase student wellbeing, you have to lower expectations. And I'll tell you why lower expectations is the recipe for a happy life. Because if you have high expectations, you create a situation where there is a very small... If you get what you expect, you feel more or less neutral. You expected something, you got it, okay, you move on. If you get more than you expect, you feel fantastic. If you get less than you expect, you feel terrible. That's just how human beings work. So if we set our expectations that kids have to get 99, we take the joy out of being a child, because if you get 97, you feel disappointed. And if you get 99, you feel neutral. The likelihood of you getting excited about how you've done is incredibly small. And that's the problem with having universal high expectations, which is what the mantra of education is constantly. High expectations, high expectations. It's like a whip we beat kids with. Let's have realistic expectations. You know, kids are fabulous. They do wonderful things, but they might not do it according to, as you say, Bem, a ranking.
Do you mind if I say something? So, I'm Lee from Reach Out, who posed that question. Former teacher, now working for reachout.com. You're 100% correct. Perfectionism, the striving to get 100%. I myself as a teacher only just left the profession a couple of weeks ago. And last year I taught a student who got an ATAR of 99.5. The whole year I saw her border on breakdown because I gave her 100%. I could not give her anything less. But yet, as a teacher, I had to give that formative feedback that said, you got 100%, but you could have done better by. It could be even better if. There is never that achievement level that, you know what, you did excellent. I always said to her, you are a far better communicator in written or verbal form than I will ever be. Yet the whole year, she struggled with perfectionism, and she will continue to struggle with that, as I do with teaching, and that's why I left the profession.
And we wonder why we have an epidemic of anxiety.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that technology will be able to do, and that's big data. And the concept that, you know, you can have what they're terming a digital twin following alongside you that monitors every piece of writing, every communication that you give. It makes assessment, which is by definition a standalone, it actually makes it, you know, irrelevant because it knows what we can and what we can't do. Just before we burn Jane at the stake for her heresy, I do
There'll be
have
people queuing up to do that.
I do have an issue with expectation because I've also seen it work the other way, and that is where the teacher's expectation is low because they're working in low socioeconomic or for, you know, based on particular backgrounds and so on. I actually think that good educators live in a state of 90% perpetual frustration and then 10% elation when people reach that, and then, you know, and then they want more. And but it's I think we agree on that. But it's for the right motive, and that is so that the person can really achieve their best. You know, and you know, I agree with you that we shouldn't be aiming at, you know, what's your best effort. I remember being told as a student, you know, as long as you've done your best. Like, God, what a weight to put on kids' shoulders. The best, right? That means you don't sleep. You know, you just work continuously. But yeah, so we should set the bar at 90%, but nor should we judge people based on their background.
Now I know why my wife has stayed married to me, thanks to low expectations. Now look, it's clear that there's been a conversation started and we can ask more questions. I wish we had more time, but I can see that Jane's water taxi to take her to the Mumbrella Awards, where she has been nominated for Columnist of the Year. Ladies and gentlemen, Jane Caro. And please do thank Jane, Bem and Peter for such an enlightening, lively, sparky debate and discussion. I hope that it not only raises more questions, but it does foster that
now that
conversation.
Jane's gone, I'd like to... No.
Look, I mean, I remember what you said, Peter, that there isn't necessarily one future that we can prepare for. There are lots of futures, and there are lots of conversations that we need to have. But they are conversations, whatever those futures may be, that we need to start now. And we need to start now with each other. Not simply telling each other what we think should be done or how it should be done, but conversations in which we listen to each other and ask each other how we can do it together. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Peter, Bem and Jane for a wonderful conversation. I'd like to now call upon the Director of Canon Business Services, Gavin GOMES, for a few words.
Thanks, Sunil. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the Thursday night out of your time. Someone once said to me, the most important thing you can give people is time, so I'd like to thank you. And to all the teachers in the room, and my first grade teacher, Mrs. Hutton, I'd like to thank you for all the things you've given me. And I really do think it's one of the blessed things that you can do is impart knowledge on the younger generation, and that's the legacy that you leave. I have to declare my interest in this space, and that is I have 4 children. One doing their VCE this year in Victoria, and I commute between 2 cities, so it's really tough. And I really took something from Jane's comment around expectations. So I had a conversation with my 16-year-old son. And I said, son, you're growing up a bit now. You kind of, you've got a girlfriend. They're going to want to know what you want to do when you get older. And he said, Dad, you know what? I just want to be average. Okay. What do you mean, son? You just want to be average? He said, I just want to be average like you. So, average expectations is not a bad thing. But look, Sunil, I want to commend you and all of the people who contributed to a marvellous piece of work, thanking our panellists tonight, but really the composition of the panel and the people who contributed was fantastic. I think you'll all agree it's an amazing report. As a company, it's just a privilege to be able to give something back to the community. And at Canon, we have a principle called Kyose, and that's living and working together for the common good. And that's really what this is about. It's really about being able to give something back to the community, to contribute to the debate. And as a company, we are blessed to be able to do a lot with schools and education as a sector. And we thank you for all of that business, and we have a lot to offer. But this is really, people say to me, what's your proudest moment of a year? And I'd have to stand up and say, today is one of my proudest moments to be able to give things back. So thank you for your contribution. Thank you for coming tonight. And please stay around, have a couple of drinks and talk to our guests. Thanks you again. Cheers.